Let's do it. I just hit record.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and kill my video so you don't have to look at me and you can focus on what we're talking about. Can everybody see my screen okay? All right. Well,
Yep.
welcome to the webinar today. Thank you guys for joining. As you can see, this is a FITSE member webinar. We're happy to have you here, and thank you, FITSE, for allowing us to bring a little bit of education and insight to a serious topic, which is bootstrapping legal IT and insurance compliance, right? This is something everybody needs to understand right now. And so we'll just jump right in. I'm going to go to the next slide. Give me just one moment. There we go. So I am Chris May. I'm with Advantage Technology. I'm our security director, all things cybersecurity and even physical security now, and advanced camera systems and advanced AI and machine learning tracking through those physical security systems. So I'll be talking to you today about cyber compliance and how that relates into the legal sector and insurance. And then we have Jennifer, who can jump right in and introduce herself.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. Jen Maisel, I'm a partner at the law firm Rothwell Fig, based out of Washington, D.C. I was a computer scientist before becoming an attorney, and I have expertise in intellectual property law, as well as privacy and data security. I'm a certified information privacy professional and advise clients on the whole spectrum of how to secure, protect, and enforce their most prized intellectual assets. Brian, I'll kick it off to you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Mahone. I am with a company called Engel, Hambright & Davies, EHD Insurance. We're a 125-year-old privately owned independent insurance agency. Basically do anything with the word insurance in it. But I specialize in small business startups, the tech and life science industry. And with that comes specialty knowledge of cyber liability insurance and clinical trial product liability insurance, which a lot of FITSE members are often asked for from a research institution or maybe a big customer. So I'll kick things over back to Chris for some of his content.
All right, thank you so much. So first of all, we're going to jump in, like I said, more on the technical side, the control side, kind of things you need to understand. Honestly, from a startup all the way through following out with the business mission. Give me just 1 second while there we are. So as you can see at the top there, we are a Microsoft enterprise partner. So we like to bring this information to you with the newest knowledge from Microsoft, which most people, of course, are using nowadays. It seems to be a pretty widely used program. But we're going to talk about cybersecurity for your business and how does this. We're going to set a stage for the things you need to know that I promise you are going to show you why you have a real need for cyber insurance and also legal professionals to help you with the compliance and the regulation side of it. So what do we need today, right? What is the plan that we should have today? There's three pretty simple things I like to break it down for you. You need protection, detection, and response, right? Sounds pretty simple. We need to protect the information, the assets. We need to detect problems that are happening with those assets, with your people, with information. And then we have to have a response, right? We have to figure out how we're going to take action once something happens. We now have to assume something will happen. It's no longer the latter where we used to think, well, maybe it won't. Now we have to assume it will. So how do we attack that? So like I said, Chris May, I'm a security solutions director. I bring this up again because there's so many avenues to security now, so many solutions that you actually need somebody to help you make sense of this. It's one of the three things that I will tell you that you need. Everybody needs a good lawyer. Everybody needs a good insurance agent. And now everybody needs a good cybersecurity person, right? It's critical to run your business. And when I say that, so what does cybersecurity mean for your business specifically, right? We have people on the phone today that are interested in what's it mean to you. Well, look at these stats. 50% of online adults, which is all of us on this call, about half were victims of cybercrime last year. And you say, well, I didn't have anything stolen. You might want to think about that again. Visa, American Express, T-Mobile just lost 4 million records recently. So if you have a T-Mobile account, when I say 4 million records, 4 million client records that had personal data in it, PII as you would refer to it. They expect this number by the time they run the numbers in 2023, this will go to 80%, right? I was just with some very high-level individuals in DC from CISA, some other government security agencies, and this is a very serious thing. So we really have to pay attention to it. Now, look at what this cost us as an economy. $500 billion last year. That's half a trillion just in what we can figure in the global economy. This number, as of this was for 2021. As of 2022, the year's not over. We're already over $1 trillion that it's cost the global economy this year. These are staggering numbers. And most of these costs are associated with businesses, right? Loss to the business, loss to revenue, just unbelievable amount of things. Here's the one that really affects all of us on the call. 20%, 1 in 5 small and medium businesses were targeted last year. That's everybody on the call, right? Pretty much. So you think about that. And when I say, look at this word targeted, I don't mean just got phishing emails randomly, right? Just some spray to everybody. I mean, they literally targeted your business, came after you to try to have some financial gain from your assets, right? That's all this is. We have to remember it's a financial crime. So these numbers are going to continue to go up and up. This number is expected to be 50% of small and medium businesses as we move into the next year. So how do we do that? Like, how do we prevent this, right? We've seen the stats. We know it's scary. We've got to protect from the beginning. And what does that look like? You have to secure identities, right? So you have to make sure that you understand who the people are that are entering your environment and your network, right? You have to know these things. Without the ability to understand who's entering your systems, you can't achieve any type of security, right? So we have to have good identity management. We have to understand where our data and applications are and how we protect them. That's one of the reasons that I recommend people need a good IT advisor at minimum nowadays, is you have this technology creep, right? You might still be running applications that have access to your computers or your servers that you haven't used in 2 years. You haven't used it, so you forgot about it, right? Well, that's an open hole somebody can get in if it's not been patched or updated. You have to understand devices. Are we letting client devices or personal devices come on our networks? Everybody has one of these now. Everybody has a cell phone, right? So you got a little personal computer in your pocket that's connected to everybody's Wi-Fi. And then how do we protect our infrastructure? And most of us have hybrid environments on premise and in the cloud, right? So we really have to stop and think about the ways that we're protecting this data and our people. So the data is a big issue, right? So what type of business data do you have that's at risk right now? Everybody has intellectual property, right? There's some type of IP in every organization or every company, even if you're a sole proprietorship. What about your financials being leaked out, or employee information, access credentials? People give away passwords constantly now. Customer and client information, the lawsuits, as I'm sure Jennifer can tell you, can get astronomical if you have a breach, right? This is why you need good legal teams to advise you ahead of time of what's going on. And again, when we talk about legal information and talk about customer and client data, you probably going to want to have really good insurance in case you get one of these lawsuits because you've lost somebody's client data, right? So this is why we're tying all three of these things together today. They're super critical. Hold on one second. The slides just seem to have frozen on me. There we go. Something we get asked a lot right now is, what about the cloud? Is it safe or is it not safe, right? Since we're talking about protecting data, protecting identities. Well, the good thing is it gives you access on the go. So we all have a cell phone. We can get to things when we need them. A lot of times cloud data, you pay for what's consumed, right? So you don't have to go buy massive servers in your office. You can process that stuff in the cloud. You can pay as you use the service and not for hardware and software you may not need. The bigger piece is, I will tell you, it can be much more safer and secure data storage now. A lot of things that we've seen over the years with insider threats, especially, or somebody has access to a physical server in your office, they can do almost anything. If we put that in a cloud resource somewhere where it's protected, these big data centers have physical security, tons of logical security, and we can lock that down where nobody can actually get physical access. Then we can shut off all the ways in and out except one and really secure that data in a cloud environment. So you'll hear a lot of things about the cloud. I will tell you, after doing this for 20 plus years, that it is very secure now, and we can do a lot of things to help you to work better, faster, and smarter with some cloud resources. Now we go to detection, right? So we know we need to protect the data, protect the assets. You have to recognize known threats, and you also have to be aware of what risks are emerging right now. That's something, again, where you need somebody that can help you, whether it's through an internal IT team, external consultants, an external company, to help you understand what is a threat in your environment, right? If you get something right now and you don't have an IT or security resource to reach out to, you're not going to know, right? The other thing is, how do you know what to plan for in the future? The attacks we're seeing today will not be the same attacks executed in the same way a month from now, a year from now, or 10 years from now. It changes every day. So we've got to really understand, how do we detect these threats? What types of softwares do we use? What types of training do we give our people? Just like we're doing now, right? This is an integral part of having the people that are hands on keyboards detect what is going on if they see an anomaly. We talk about detection. There's some common attacks. We have phishing is the biggest one. It looks like this slide got a little off kilter here, but you basically want to watch for suspicious email addresses, generic salutations. If it just says, "Hey person," "Hey, how you doing?" Right? Nothing that's directly addressed to you. Anything that's alarming, that's trying to set off alarm bells, right? Typically, they're trying to figure a fear response in these phishing emails. They're trying to get you to take an action without thinking, right? You see it, you say, "Oh my gosh, my Microsoft 365 password isn't going to work. I need to update it now." You click on that link, it looks just like 365. You log it in, now you've given somebody your password, right? And misspellings. This will always be true. If we were going to be hired to work in Spain, we would be expected to speak very good Spanish. Probably some Catalan, maybe, just because it's maybe some Portuguese because of the people they work with, if you've ever been there. They would expect us to be able to communicate in those languages clearly. It's the same thing here. If you get something that's incredibly broken English that sounds like a fifth grader wrote it, most likely that's probably not somebody hired to reach out for their business. So that's a very, very key indicator too, if we see something that's not good on those phishing emails. Ransomware. Ransomware is typically the goal of phishing now. They want to get into your system so they can lock you out and you don't have access to your data. Then you have to pay. Unless you have good backups and you can restore from backups, but that still is a horrible undertaking. What they're doing with phishing emails is they're trying to harvest your credentials, your username and password. They will use that username and password to gain access. And then within 30 to probably 250 days, they're going to lock everything out you have and force you to pay. It is not a good thing, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's probably one of the biggest threats to business right now that we see. You have to also assume a breach mindset. I said that a minute ago, right? We now have to assume that we're going to be breached. You've got to protect, contain, and isolate these high-value assets. Imagine if you lose access to all of your, maybe you've got some type of patent information or some trade secret that you lose access to that you don't know. Maybe it's a formulary that you have no idea what it would be without this data, but you're locked out. So part of your security strategy needs to be to back up your important data, not only on site, but off site somewhere in case the building burns down, there's a fire, there's a flood, right? We need that data replicated elsewhere in case there is a cyber attack or an emergency, we can restore you. Beware of tech support scams. These are huge right now, especially in small business. Somebody's going to send you an email telling you their tech support, they need to help you do X, Y, and Z. Somebody's going to call you, send you a text message telling you something on your phone needs X, Y, and Z. I'm from tech support. Problem with that is when you get on the phone with them, you believe their tech support, you're going to give them a lot of information to help you with a problem you may not even have. So we really need to watch out for tech support scams right now. And be suspicious of those cold calls and block pop-ups on your browser, the ones that come up and say you've got to update this and that and buy McAfee and buy Norton and buy all these other things. You really have to be careful of those pop-ups and those suspicious cold calls about problems with your machine, and plan ahead, right? You want to be prepared to detect these threats. You want to have a policy, right? This is another thing where sometimes you want to get really good legal advice, right? Sit down and get compliance advice. Make sure your policy matches what you do. Make sure if you have a cyber insurance policy that the policies you have that talk about ways to recover and financial ways to recover, that it includes sensible conversations with the people that will help you recover. And educate your employees. Let them know what to look for. We suggest you do an annual training with every employee you have. That's something we can help you set up at no cost, right? This is a very low-hanging fruit you can do for free, but they're going to be your best line of defense because they have hands on keyboards every day. And then the last piece is respond, right? You have to be prepared to stop an attack, to do the proper reporting, right? Again, we keep talking about legal and compliance issues, but if you have a breach of public data, there's certain reporting requirements that you have to fall into. And my first response every time is going to be to send you to a lawyer, right? Because at this point, when you have to start reporting a breach and notify and reassure customers, it's a big deal. So what happens when we respond? What do we need to look out for? Well, first of all, we need to get help, legal and technical help, assess the damage, assess any reporting obligations, and you might have to contact law enforcement, right? So that's something if you're prepared for this ahead of time, it's much easier once something happens. And then mitigating the damage. You have to respond quickly. You have to notify customers and clients, and you have to comply with any regulatory information. You keep hearing me say that, but I'm watching huge lawsuits and people even getting charged with actual crimes, right? Like offenses that you can go to jail for data breaches. So make sure that you have all this in place to mitigate the damage. And then we'll run through this lastly. Cloud storage is huge. We can make it mobile and reliable. Things like Office 365, Google Drives, Google Cloud Storage, AWS. Secure your email. Business Premium is great, but there's also advanced security features if you're just running Office 365 that can really help. And then have somebody managing your antivirus software. That's a big one for me. And lastly, protect your assets, back your data up, make a plan that detects threats and reduces the risk, and respond to breaches rapidly and appropriately. Right? This three pretty simple things. We're going to send you guys all these slides. But just try to remember that: protect, detect, and respond, and find somebody that can help you figure out how to do that. We'll take questions at the end, but that's my time for now. Hope that was valuable. And I think we're going to jump to Jen, if I'm not mistaken.
Thanks, Chris, and appreciate the setup on the team approach, because it really is a team approach when we're talking about data security between IT, lawyers, insurance, the stakeholders of the company. It's really a team approach. And
you want to share?
Yeah, I'll switch over to my screen.
There we go. I'm out.
All right. Jump to the right slide. All right. So we're really talking about a team approach here, and I put together a brief presentation here. I'm not going to get through all the material in the slides because, quite frankly, it's like drinking out of a fire hose these days, trying to stay on top of all the compliance obligations, the new regulatory developments. But I want to give you an overview of the latest and greatest. And just want to give a shout out to a couple of my colleagues at Rothwell Figg's privacy and data security practice. So AJ Tejan and Kristen Logan, who helped put these slides together. And when we talk about legal, there's no single data protection law. Instead, what we're dealing with is a patchwork system. So I'm just going to switch these screens. Great. So we're really talking about a patchwork system of federal regulations, federal and state statutes, as well as state data breach laws. You've probably seen a lot of news lately. Chris mentioned a couple of cases about, from the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. They're consumer focused. They're in charge of enforcement when it comes to unfair or deceptive trade practices, and they enforce federal privacy and data protection laws. At the federal level as well, there are a number of statutes, mostly industry specific, targeting industries such as financial, insurance, schools, children, healthcare. Some of those industries that handle what we would consider very sensitive PII, personally identifiable information, like social security numbers, credit reports, health information, things that can really cause a lot of damage to individuals if left out there in the open. And then state law, all 50 states have data breach notification laws. You may have seen in the news some of the more general data protection laws. For example, the California Consumer Privacy Act and CCPRA now, New York, Virginia. There are lots of upcoming general data protection laws. And when I say data protection laws, I mean a law that's not industry specific, but a law that's targeting just general data management practices when it comes to PII. As well as what to do in an event of a breach where there's PII. And rather than the specific buckets of kind of industry specific information that we have from our federal statutes, we're talking about things as potentially as simple as names, email addresses, things like device identifiers, any kind of information that can uniquely identify an individual. So I want to give just a highlight of kind of the latest and greatest in both FTC as well as district court enforcement actions, and a couple of nuggets to take away from those. So first, turning to the FTC, consumer facing, talking about unfair and deceptive trade practices. And I pulled out a couple of themes from some of these recent enforcement actions that I'm going to go through now. So one is this idea of personal liability. As Chris mentioned, sometimes we're talking about jail time for specific individuals depending on the type of cybercrime and breach that has happened, especially when you try to cover it up. A recent FTC enforcement action against Drizzly highlighted this idea of personal liability, where not only was the company at risk and subject to a consent order with the FTC, but that consent order also applied to the CEO for his failures as part of the company's data management practices and handling of certain security and incidents. So, you know, there's this great quote from the order: in the modern economy, corporate executives frequently move from company to company, notwithstanding blemishes on their track record, and emphasizing that this order will follow the CEO Relis, even if he leaves Drizzly. So, you know, we're not just talking about corporate liability, but also potentially personal liability, some of these breaches. Failure to adequately train employees is a big one. Again, you heard Chris talk about phishing. In the Chegg case, there were 4 separate data breaches, 3 of which involved phishing attacks on employees. And, you know, when you're talking about 4 phishing attacks in a relatively short time period, there's some training issues at play. I mean, you need to train your employees regularly on some of these common types of hacks and infiltration techniques that Chris had mentioned. And the FTC, as part of their complaint, alleged that the data breaches were the result of poor data security practice, including failure to develop adequate training, security policies, and training. And here, you know, one other thing to note when it comes to PII, you could be talking about PII of your customers, so your outward facing customers that you're dealing with day to day, as well as your employees. And both types of PII can trigger these data protection laws and enforcement actions. Lots of failures to maintain reasonable security measures. And I personally hate this word reasonable, but it really is what you think it is. It's, you know, looking at the industry and what your competitors are doing, entities of a similar size and in the same industry. You have to stay up to date on the latest and greatest security measures and take precautions. And there were a number of enforcement actions that highlighted scenarios where the company did not take reasonable security measures. One was failing to encrypt sensitive data. There was a database that was not encrypted that contained social security numbers and other sensitive information of individuals, which violated industry practice of encrypting that data at rest. Not having multi-factor authentication. And insecure storage of information login credentials. You know, there was an incident where someone posted login credentials for a server on a public GitHub repository and other public repositories. So, you know, any hacker with a moderate degree of investigation skills could find these credentials and just walk right into these systems. And then failure to monitor for threats or respond to threats and known security incidents. You know, one theme is if you're aware of a breach, well, one, you have to be monitoring for a breach. And 2, once you become aware of a breach, that starts the clock ticking for that investigation and to take action in response. And then misrepresentations and breaking promises. Again, Chris had mentioned notices and public-facing documents to consumers. If you have a privacy policy where you're saying you're doing one thing, but behind the scenes you're doing another thing, that can lead to liability. Twitter's a great example of this. They were collecting phone numbers and email addresses of their users, saying we're using this to authenticate you to our site, but failed to disclose that they're using that PII for targeted advertising. And FTC issued a $150 million penalty in order concerning these data collection and use practices. And switching gears a little bit, I was talking about FTC enforcement actions. You probably also heard about some of the big class action lawsuits out there. These data breach litigations concerning tons and tons of data of consumers. Chris had also mentioned the T-Mobile case. It's the largest settlement that was announced this year at $350 million, as well as additional spending to boost data security practices. According to the complaint, T-Mobile failed to comply or implement reasonable security practices that were standard in the industry concerning their GGSN node. And it allowed hackers to access more than 100 servers of T-Mobile. And, you know, it's just another highlight here where thinking back on what does the word reasonable mean? When we talk about reasonable security measures. Here, there's a lot of attention in the complaint and the allegations on what competitors in the mobile industry were doing to protect their data. And, you know, the complaint noted that T-Mobile had failed to implement rate limiting measures, which was a standard industry protection. So there is a bit of a sliding scale in terms of what exactly you're expected to do to maintain reasonable security practices. But, you know, one good place to look is with your competitors and entities of a similar size. The OPM data breach, for those of you who have been in the DC and surrounding area long enough, you may have gotten one of those notices a couple years back. I know I did in response to the OPM data breach. It affected more than 21 million people. It was one of the largest thefts of personal data from the US government in history. And there were a couple failures upon failures in data security practices involving vendors, and you know, just failures to adequately patch, to update systems, and establish the right controls to detect the breach, because it did go undetected for quite some time. This data breach litigation resulted in a $63 million settlement. So again, we're seeing some very large numbers out there in terms of liability. Sullivan, this is an Uber case. Some of you may have seen headlines about it and the whole data breach incident and how Uber, quite frankly, failed to adequately respond to this breach. This is another one of those cover-up stories where Uber had paid the hackers $100,000 to not release the data. And to keep quiet about their attack. And by contrast, you heard Chris just mention that in the event of a ransomware attack, you know, you have to assume there's a breach and act accordingly. By contrast here, Uber really tried to cover it up, specifically through Sullivan, and instead steered that payment through their bug bounty program and kind of hid it under the rug. And jury found Sullivan guilty, and the case is still pending, so we'll see how it shakes out. But again, themes of personal liability, as well as, you know, having measures in place for responding to security incidents. And here's an interesting one. So far, we've been talking about settlements for the large part, you know, with the FTC and some of these cases, OPM, but in Hiscox, there's a breach of a law firm from an organization with the catchy name, the Dark Overlord. And this case actually went to a jury trial. And interestingly enough, thinking about that sliding scale and what companies are obligated to do, the jury actually found for the defendant in this case, finding that the plaintiff did not meet their burden to show that what the defendant did was unreasonable under the circumstances, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how people interpret this finding and what the appeal process looks like. But I don't know, maybe if you have good documented practices, had the team in place and had your policies and procedures out there, maybe it is something to fight down the road. And here's a helpful data point. And just finally, talking about legal risk, here's some really low fruit hanging ways to address risk. One is to document and limit the scope of data collection and retention. You may have heard about document retention policies, document destruction policies. It quite frankly is a liability to have a lot of PII and other sensitive data sitting around that you're not using. And it's important to get, to do a roadmap and to see what personal information and sensitive data your organization is collecting and figure out, hey, do we actually need this? And if not, consider destroying it because it is a sitting liability. Implementing a comprehensive security program. Again, talking about the team approach, you need to have buy-in from management overseeing a data security program. Think again about the personal liability obligations where you have CEOs and other top executives who just quite simply failed to implement the internal policies and procedures. But it's best to have that in place beforehand before you have to respond on the fly to a data breach, which often happens at inconvenient times. Implement industry standard basic security measures. And this is something that people like Chris can help with. Just figuring out what do you need to do, hiring competent IT to secure your systems, outsourcing where appropriate, maintaining reasonable control over your vendors that are handling your information. You have to make sure you're on top of best practices. When it does come time to a breach, you have to be accurate in your notices and disclosures. That's why, legal gets involved. We have to bless the notices. We have to make sure they're accurate, they're not misrepresenting information, and that the correct people are notified, whether it's affected customers or law enforcement. And again, just reiterating that team approach. So with that, I'll kick things off to Brian.
Perfect. Can you hear me? And you see my screen here, ensuring innovation. As Jen and Chris kind of went through their presentation, I have a T-Mobile data breach notice sitting on my desk. I was a customer, and I used to buy books from Chegg as well. So I've been in both of those personally, but professionally, I help small businesses really finance their risk through insurance contracts. So kind of the lens of my talk will be, this startup life cycle I found. And really, the first thing that happens when an insurance person gets involved with a startup is basically they need a door, right? They need a place to call home. They need an address. They need an office space. They need lab space. And that's pretty basic, right? You might be able to get by with some sort of, local family agent or a state farm. You need general liability if there's a slip and fall, if you were to cause damage to your office or lab space at FTSE, they need, their tenant to cover those types of things. If you have employees, basically you need workers' comp for if they're injured anywhere in the country. It's very state specific. So Maryland's a pretty strict state. And then maybe this concept of hired and non-owned auto liability. You might be a startup and say, hey, we don't have company vehicles. Why do we need auto coverage? Well, if you were to rent a vehicle, but also someone working on your team and employees, commuting to the office or going to the post office or going to the bank or meeting a client and they're using their personal auto, there are still some business auto liability attached to that, even though they're using their personal auto. So really the friends and family pre-seed stage, that's really all you're looking at is to check a box. We don't really see, any claims or high premiums here. As you move on to, your first big capital injection, whether, that's some sort of seed round, Series A or B, maybe your board of directors is growing. That's where, you want to make sure you're working with someone who understands the tech and life science industry and the insurance carriers that play in that space. The first thing you might happen that's pretty basic is property insurance, right? Maybe you have computers and equipment and inventory and stock or prototypes. You physically need to protect that business personal property. You might not own a building, you're still renting, but you still have contents that needs covered. Directors and officers insurance is a huge thing that comes into play. A lot of investors or new board members would be weary to join a startup if there's not a policy in place. And Jen kind of alluded to this, that these directors and officers can be personally liable outside of the company. So the easiest way to think of D&O is, there's side A, side B, and side C coverage. So basically it's, for the company on its own, the company and the D&Os if they're named in a suit together, and then just the D&Os if just the D&Os are named. Another big issue with life science biotech startups in particular that might work at FTSE is you're doing something unique, doing maybe clinical trials, some sort of medical device, and you're inputting something foreign into the human body for the first time. You're doing a phase 1 clinical trial, or you're getting out of animal testing. There's the concept of clinical trial product liability. Well, what if that harms someone? You might think of, this is kind of a big pharmaceutical company problem, but really these coverages and these policies grow with the company as the various phases of their clinical trials progress. So, these policies are D&O and product liability are going to be two of the biggest expenses as startups kind of get growing. Sticking with kind of our theme of cyber, and October was Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We had to push to November, but oftentimes, if there is proprietary data that has been breached, hopefully a cyber insurance policy is in place, because it's going to be a nightmare if you don't have it in place. And really the way it works is it's designed for consumers of technology. There's another coverage for providers of technology called technology errors and omissions, which includes some cyber coverage in there. But basically it's a panic button. You have a policy in place. It's a 1-800 365 24/7 incident response hotline. Hey, something's going on. I'm not sure what it is. That phone number is manned by a law firm, someone like Jennifer, who understands privacy law, and they kind of act as a data breach response coach and quarterback breach response efforts. So they get in, IT forensics. Think of, the most expensive attorney in the world's hourly rate times 3. I mean, these IT forensics guys are extremely expensive and in high demand, and they figure out, what happened, what kind of data was stolen, how the bad guys got in. Legal analyzes the IT forensics report and kind of matches that against various laws to figure out, do we need to notify those affected legally? You might have hundreds or thousands of customers and only a few employees. How are you going to notify them? Well, you have notification service providers that come in to do those types of things. Let's send these nice little letters out. At the same time, you don't want to end up in the local news, right? So you might have to hire a public relations firm to kind of smooth things over with your current customers and future customers. All of this, mess is happening all while you probably aren't generating any revenue, right? You can't, log in, you can't send an invoice. Like we're an insurance agency, we have an agency management system that has all of our clients' information and the way we interact with them. Hospital has a patient management system. So if you have some sort of software you rely on, you can't access your sitting duck, right? Well, you still have to pay your taxes and your overhead and your insurance. Cyber insurance can cover your business interruption loss due to a data breach. So it's a very dynamic product, and oftentimes, startups aren't really asked for it right away. But you better bet once you land a big contract with maybe a research hospital or a university or a big customer, they might require you to carry some. So that's something I focus on here at EHD. And there's also, I kind of call this the currency of doing business, a certificate of liability, right? This is how you prove you're covered. And you might be submitting a bid for a new client or contract, and you have to prove to either your landlord, maybe Fitzy, or maybe a customer that you have coverage. And it's done in a very specific way in the insurance industry. Your agent or broker will create a certificate of insurance and proving that you have what you have and compare that to what they want and kind of negotiate and compare and contrast. So I've seen a lot of the times where, John Hopkins or Johnson Johnson, these startups are working with these huge entities, and often they honestly get bullied when it comes to insurance requirements, and it doesn't make sense for a less than $1 million revenue Fitzy startup to carry $10 million worth of cyber coverage or $10 million umbrella. So if you do have that team in place of legal, IT, or an insurance, they'll be able to help you kind of push back on this and save you a lot of headache and money. I'll open up the mics here for any questions you might have, and I have a couple questions for Jen and Chris as well. But I have my own kind of website where I just post content and videos, and really our industry gets definitely a bad rap. Nobody likes insurance. They all hate insurance. It's too expensive. They're never going to use it, all of those great things. But kind of a framework of trying to understand, is what I have good? Is the way I'm going about it a good way? I mean, you've all heard of, business, the Business Bureau, BBB. Bare bones, an agent is an insurance person that's kind of held captive to an insurance carrier. Like State Farm agents sell State Farm, and they can't really offer you anything else. A broker or an independent agent works with dozens of carriers and kind of compare and contrast and recommend different solutions and pricing. So we have an alphabet soup in our industry: CPCU, CIC. Those things are all well and good. Some of the more advanced things I'd look out for is what are you getting besides a policy? Are you getting, advice on contracts or any risk control, claims, services, those types of things? Is your solution in place now still faxing you things or mailing you things? Startups need to move quick. E-sign, online payment, e-delivery, portals, video quotes, all those things are great. And then industry-specific knowledge, right? Specialists are always better to work with than generalists, and really that's true in anything you hire, even personal contractors at your home. So someone that can understand tech and life science and kind of work with the appropriate underwriters and carriers to negotiate those contracts. So I'll open up the mics here. I just have the three of us up here. There was kind of throughout the presentation a lot of talks of these big companies, right? Uber and Chegg, and there's this myth out there that well, these data breaches, these cyber issues aren't my problem. I'm little old me, 3-person startup in Frederick, Maryland. Why would anybody want my information? I'm curious if Chris, you could kind of talk on that, and Jen maybe chime in on that myth out there that this is really a small business issue, not a corporate America issue.
Absolutely. So we're, just for the information, we were on the call, we're a full service IT and cybersecurity firm. We're the largest one in West Virginia. We also have offices, of course, in Maryland, Frederick. But we get referred clients all the time in from businesses with literally 2 employees up to 40 employees from other smaller IT companies that have had a breach and don't know what to do. They weren't prepared. They don't know how to handle it. Anything from, so this week I've had 3 different clients have problems because that originated with business email compromise. Right. Basically, they answered a phishing link. They gave somebody their passwords, and one of them has 12 employees, and one of their accounts sent out 600 emails to every customer they have in their contacts. Right. Imagine that 600 emails that had links in them to actual malware. And some of those people opened that malware, caused them issues. You can see where this is going to go. So, and like I said, that was a small company. What we've seen, and Brian brought that up, we traditionally saw the attacks on larger targets for years because they had the most money, there was the most to gain. Well, that trend has changed. While they still attack them, that's a much harder ask, right? So what they've done is shifted the focus to the people that are least protected. This is just a financial crime. I promise you, if you have a bank account, you are a target. That's what I've been telling people. They don't really care about your data as much as how they use that data and how they monetize it, right? Either get you to pay for it or sell it to somebody else. So the fact that you have a bank account, especially as a small business, they look at you as an easier target because you have less protections. And it's just, that's where we've seen the biggest increase, honestly. I used to see most of the security breaches and ransomwares of companies of about 75, 100 people and up. And recently, in the last probably 2 years, especially since COVID, it's went the other direction. So it's a huge concern for everybody on here. The good news is, though, you don't have to spend the money that enterprise spends, right? We can do some things very low hanging fruit, right? And now a lot of these security products are per user or per seat or per computer. So it's very relative. Somebody with 5 computers and 5 people, we can give you the same security we can give to enterprise, just at a much scaled down version and price point. So it's definitely a huge concern right now.
I'll jump in on that. I fully agree with everything Chris just said. And it's really about the target. Sometimes the smaller companies really are the vulnerable target in the whole ecosystem. And I advise clients all the time on matters where, maybe it's a 3 or 4 person startup. They have a really innovative product. They're partnering with a much larger firm or customer who sends over their form paperwork, and you have to sign away your life and all sorts of other things, your reps and warranties about your data security practices, the checklist, all of those representations that you have to make in order to do business. And that gets a lot of companies in trouble. And the OPM data breach, I think, was a good example of this, where the breach originated through a contractor, a government contractor, and infiltrated through the system. So, we're really not just talking about large enterprises. Those tend to be the ones that get the big dollar amounts, but a lot of times these breaches originate with, the smaller companies that people may think are easier targets. So cybersecurity is for everyone.
It is. And I'll follow up real quick to that too, something a lot of people don't think about. And she just said it. A lot of these breaches are through third parties now, right? Somebody you're connected to. Most hospital breaches don't come through the hospital. They come through somebody they're connected to that has access into their system. The same goes for your IT and security provider. If you're using somebody or plan to use somebody for that, find out what their security practices are, right? Do they have the right certifications to do it well? We're one of the few companies I know of our size in this space that has a SOC 2 certification, which is an attestation that tells you that we do everything securely, that we lock our data down, that we are safe. Make sure you ask for these things now if you're going to do business with people that you're directly tied into their systems and their communication stream, because it can bring a nightmare down on you. As Jen said, I have seen it more times than I'd care to count lately.
Yeah, we're seeing a trend too, just like having your financials audited by, accounting firm and stamped off on the SOC 2 Type 2 reports is really next in line to be pretty mainstream. And that's, what Chris said, just a report you pay for from an outside accounting or IT company to basically verify that you have the IT controls in place that you say you do. I did have one other question. And maybe we all take a different spin on this, but if you were a startup, right, and you only had, I don't know, $10,000, $1,000, and there was, one process or one product or one service you would implement, in legal or IT and insurance, what would it be? I mean, whether it was the way to get to your provider or a specific thing that maybe your outsourced provider should be doing, like not a one size fits all, but something that'll have maybe the most impact. Say you're 6 employees or less.
Sure. Yeah, we see this every day. We get calls for startups that ask us to come in and build a ground up solution, right? So one of the first things I tell people, and I mentioned earlier, is a lot of times there's not a need to invest in a server in your office right now, right? So let's find a way to easily share information, securely share information, documents, and store those. Microsoft 365, we can use anything in the world. We're a big IT company. It's what we choose to use because it's that low hanging fruit. You don't have to keep an email server on site. We can secure it. It's available, right? It's a big enough product that we know how to keep it safe and it communicates well. We can put other security layers to lock it down. You're talking for licenses of about $12.50 a month per user. You can get full email that's secure. You can get OneDrives, so we can have good cloud storage for you, a terabyte for each user, where you can securely store those documents so they're safe. They're not just on a desktop. If the computer dies, you still have them. It also includes SharePoint, which becomes a really good place to share your resources with other people that we can lock down really well instead of just emailing them back and forth. We can give you sites in there, and then all the Word, Microsoft Office applications come with it as well. You can build a really tight little package around email, document sharing, document storage for literally $12.50 a month a user, and it's always updated, it's always secured. You never have to patch it. It does its thing. That is usually where we start. That and a good firewall at your main location. Those two things, you need a good firewall. No matter how big or small you are, that is your front door, your alarm system, your gatekeeper to the internet.
I think that's great. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? You can rely on third-party services that have been tested and proven, keep your software up to date. From the liability perspective, prevention is the best medicine, I think. And I always reiterate data minimization, having a document destruction plan, when you're in the early stages, just keep what you need. And I know that can be hard to figure out right away, but just have a good understanding in terms of what data you have and, try to limit your exposure.
Yeah, I would agree. On my end, if I had to pick one thing for every small business owner or FTSE startup to do, a lot of people don't really understand how insurance works, and maybe that's on purpose, or maybe they have a bad agent or what. I don't know why. But you get to pick two things as a business owner, right? You get to pick the carrier, and you get to pick the agent or the broker. And just like you'd shop for a car, online or out of dealerships, you want to do it in two specific ways. I mean, we often talk about a thing called a broker selection process that really only large companies treat it this way, and they don't even talk about insurance coverages or premiums or any of that stuff. They go around and they almost like they're hiring a candidate and interview various agencies on their specialties and capabilities and all those things, and then from there that's how they get through to the carrier. And sometimes we have clients where they want to shop every carrier every single year, and really they shoot themselves in the foot. These underwriters take notes. They know which businesses come with which agent every single year, and they know there's no loyalty, and they just kind of automatic decline. It's kind of like an HR director with 500 resumes on their desk. Same thing is true with underwriters. You want to strategically shop every few years, and with what we refer to as a top of the stack submission with complete data, not last minute, ahead of time, proactive, and go beyond boring insurance applications, because these underwriters are humans, even though they seem like robots, and tell a story. So sometimes we put together what we call like a cosign narrative of here's our company, here's where we've been and our history, and here's what we're struggling with, what we're doing now, and here's where we want to be in the future, and kind of paint that picture. So business owners almost never do that. Big companies kind of take that approach, but we have, I think, 2 or 3 more minutes. Andrew or Nia, do you have any questions that maybe you're seeing day to day at Fitzy that you think maybe this group of folks would be able to touch on before we go?
I don't personally. It's got a lot of wheels turning in my head, not only for our startups, but for Fitzy itself.
Yeah,
Um, which is interesting, but I think a large, not necessarily anyone on this meeting, but a large portion of people probably don't think about this stuff, especially at the early stage. It's
definitely.
probably not a concern to them until, something happens. So I want to thank you guys for doing this because I think it's extremely valuable information that we can then, disseminate in the future.
Well, one of the
Awesome.
biggest things you can do is just to have this resource, right? I mean, to the people on the call or to the people that may come through Fitzy in the future that aren't on the call today, I think the three of us can tell you, we're here to help. Most of my life is giving advice, right? And it may not be always advice that leads to a direct sale with us, but that's not really what we're looking for at the end of the day. My goal is to secure businesses better because it makes my job easier. Right. At the end of the day, I'm a security guy and you have a lawyer and an agent representative here. And our job is to honestly to help assess risk and to mitigate risk at the end of the day. And startups, that's a big thing, right? I've started my own companies. You guys are in a risky position as it is. And so if we can help you to eliminate some of that risk, and honestly, I'll tell you right now, I believe after doing this for this many years that cybersecurity is the biggest threat to business we face today. Your whole entire operation is forward facing to the internet pretty much. So it's basically like leaving your front door sitting in Times Square where anybody can walk in 24/7. What's going to happen if that door's not locked well? Right? That's a really easy way to picture it in your mind. So definitely, I know for me, use us as a resource. I can do complimentary cybersecurity training for your organization. I know, I'm sure, Jen and Brian are on here for the same reason. If you need advice from us, just reach out. I mean, it's simple email sometimes can save you a nightmare in the end.
I fully agree. And just to add on to that, I could probably speak for, all three of us on this point. We'd much rather have the conversation with you now, before there's an incident, before there's an issue. This is really one of those areas where it's best to be proactive. And I say that as a litigator, someone that loves being in court, but really we don't want to meet you when you've already had a data breach. We want to set up those protections in advance.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Andrew, I'll get over the recording and slides and everything to you. And if any questions come up, you know where to reach us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you,
so
everybody.
much.
Enjoy the day.
Bye, everybody.
You too.
Thanks, guys.